What's up, traders? Eric here from MajorLeagueTrading.com. And tomorrow, I think, is going to be a fun one. So, the past 2 days have been rather brutal, to say the least, especially even today, right? I mean, we can look at the action across the board, and it literally is flat, like a board. I mean, it didn't really go anywhere, right? We stayed basically right at the opening print here. We closed within 1 point here in the S&Ps. And the thing is, like, this doesn't really tell the full story because, when you bring over, a chart of the 4 indices together here and you just kind of look across the board, we did manage to have some divergences on the day, as you can see here. But again, S&P's relatively flat. Something I think that's interesting that stands out here is Nasdaq ultimately was able to get a nice downtrend going here and held it pretty much for the entire day, right? It closed relatively weak here, considering, opening print was up here at like 660s. It closes, 100 points lower down here in 560s, right? And then when you drop down here to the Dow, it's like, okay, like the Dow just got itself a nice like rally going on the day and doesn't seem to care. It's actually, kind of up a little bit in after hours right now when the Nasdaq's down fairly decent, 150 points in after hours here. And then the Russell basically went a whole lot of nowhere, right? It tried to go higher, tried to go lower, and then, for the most part, ends up closing relatively close to the opening print there. So we had a really kind of interesting Nasdaq Dow kind of flip-flop day, which isn't something we've seen as of late, right? We've seen Nasdaq Russell kind of battle it out, but we haven't seen Nasdaq Dow, right? So I think there's a couple important things to take note of here going into tomorrow. And one of these I just dropped in, on my Instagram as well with the 441.75 level that's right down here. As you can see, we're down kind of testing in and around that area right now. I do think we'll probably try and hold it a bit in the overnight session and maybe try and pop up here, and work towards some of this gap just a little bit. It would make some sense that we would see that and try to hold the level going into tomorrow. But if we fail this level of 441.75s, around FOMC or any of that, there's a lot of room. 16,956.50s. We could see, over the next couple of days, a really big move to the downside. Now, one thing that stands out to me too at the moment is just the weakness in which we've seen out of Apple, right? If you look at Apple, it really started I noticed it last Friday. We really started to get a decent little push to the downside there. So midday Thursday, it ultimately ended up giving it up. And then on Friday, it obviously, ended up giving it up even more here. And we're getting a pretty decent, pullback here. So at the moment, the question is like, okay, are Apple earnings really going to be that great? And with regard to earnings, like we've seen, just as of today, Microsoft reported here in the after hours. It's relatively unchanged. Given the extension across the board on this chart, right, I would think that it probably at some point tries to pull back. So I'm not super interested in longs, but it's also so strong I can't really short it, so I'm kind of stuck in there. Ideally, it would have done something like SMCI here, where we got the big gap up, and now this thing is starting to, fade here. So I'm ultimately looking for this to make a move back to $402.86. Now, again, if something changes, we get some more data out of this, then obviously, we can adjust and go from there with it. But at the moment, I don't see a good long in here, and I don't want to get long a quote-unquote pullback until we get down into 402.86s. Now, in after hours, we also had AMD report. This one's down about 10, 12 points here, and under 156.50, this thing can really start to get moving to the downside here. So obviously it's already down fairly decent, but it really, really could start moving under that 156.50, which you guys can see if I kind of go like this, is way down in here. So we're currently about right there, and we got some room to drop into there. So 156.50s could also end up being the point in which it decides it wants to hold and give us a long opportunity. So it's going to be in a really interesting spot as well. Google here, talked about this one down 142.60 area. And realistically, this thing has room, down to 140.22s. So it's currently hanging out about right in here. And we did try and, pop down, almost tag the level so far. So I am expecting in both AMD and Google for both of these levels to test. The big thing is going to be, can they ultimately end up holding, and can Nasdaq hold that level, right? And if we take a look at something like a Meta here, which has earnings later in the week, and this is the interesting part, is we're seeing some like early sympathy here. There was really nothing on the calendar. If we go ahead and pull over the Forex Factory calendar for this, we can see the big things tomorrow. Obviously, 8:30, we've got some employment cost index, whatever that is, some ADP non-farm employment change, and then the big one, obviously, federal funds rate and FOMC and press conference later in the day. But in terms of why we would see something like a Meta down, there's no, I guess maybe Google, right? That I guess would be the sympathy to that. You can make the argument there, I guess. But we're getting decent reactions across the board in a number of these names. Even Amazon putting in a little bit of a sympathy here, and I don't necessarily, maybe that's to Microsoft. I don't know. Again, I don't necessarily, outside of obviously what Amazon is and what Meta is, I don't know the relationship to what some of these names do behind the scenes from a fundamental standpoint or whatever. I'm just going to look obviously at the sympathy and what we have coming up here. So I do know one thing for sure is that there are a lot of big movers taking place here. And I want to be very aware of that, very patient, and very precise with the trades in which we take this week. Because I do think, as we just looked at with the Nasdaq here, there is an insane amount of room one direction or another here. And the key thing is going to be that 441.75s for this. So anyways, that's what I've got for tonight's free video. Take care. Hope it helps. And I will see you guys on the next one. Peace.